Welcome back to another episode of Reliability Expo, and today we're in Bradenton, Florida at the Iris facility.
All right, so now we're going to unbox the Delta T system. This is the typical box that gets shipped to a customer with the basic setup. So we're going to unbox it, see what's involved in this, and take a look. All right. All right, so it looks like there's two units sitting inside of it, two Delta T units, and a gateway. So we'll unbox these and we'll explain exactly what each one of these is for as we go through this. So let's talk a little bit about the gateway first. So the unit, the Delta T, is a cabinet temperature humidity device. So you'd hook it up to your electrical cabinets and you can take those readings, and we'll get into all of that in just a second. In order for it to send those signals, it has to be received by the hub. And so this gateway device is exactly that. So if anyone's familiar with the smart home, this is the gateway that takes all of your devices and puts signals onto the internet. So this device has a range of about 300 feet. Would connect to the internet inside your electrical room, and then all the devices or all the Delta T sensors that you purchase would talk and communicate through this gateway and send their signals and their readings through the intranet and into your PC when we take a look at the software in just a little bit. So let's take a look at the hub. So this is the hub here. The hub has a USB port, it has an Ethernet cable, and power supply. So I'm going to guess what we find the remainder in the box is probably the power supply. Let's take a look. And that's exactly right. So we've just got a basic transformer power supply for the unit itself. The unit itself uses the Z-Wave platform, so all of the devices communicate through Z-Wave to the hub. The hub then converts that signal and sends it out through the Ethernet cable. All right, let's take a look at each of the Delta T devices themselves. We've got a couple of instructions here. We've got some batteries. We've got a mounting template, which is good. So this is the Delta T device itself. So the device itself monitors a couple of different things. When mounting it to your cabinet, it takes readings for the internal temperature of the cabinet. And so there will be a hole that gets drilled in the cabinet using this template. And based on this template, you would drill a mounting screw as well as the sensor port would go through the cabinet. It's got a gasket and a nut to secure it. And this first sensor would take internal temperature of the cabinet itself. In addition to that, because this mounts on the surface of the cabinet, there's an additional temperature sensor that senses ambient temperature of the room itself. So you can see the Delta T. On this side is also humidity sensor, so you'll be able to take humidity readings for inside the cabinet. So it's a plastic molded construction. It's sturdy. There's no, it doesn't feel flimsy at all. It's pretty nice. It's got a nice clean label on it. It'll be very easy to see exactly where it's mounted. It's a different color than the cabinet would normally be, so makes it a good idea to identify exactly where you have these mounted and where maybe you don't. So between two of these and the gateway, that's your basic initial kit that you can purchase as a one inventory item, have it shipped right to you, all ready to go. You end up with the gateway, two devices to get yourself started. Okay, so basically your Delta T alert sensors mount to your cabinets. They're taking readings, they're communicating with the gateway. The gateway is sending that to software through your intranet. We're going to go through the software in just a bit. Additionally, on the side of the gateway, there's a couple of buttons, one to sync to these devices, one to connect to a Wi-Fi network. They're completely unnecessary in this setup. The software does the searching for the devices. And so while they're there, they're really not necessary because you're going to want to name your devices in the software anyway. So it's much cleaner to just go right to the software and manage all this directly in there. So in just a few seconds, we're going to sit down and we're going to go over the software and see exactly what these devices can do for you. Awesome, welcome back. We're here now with Tyler McDonald. He is responsible for the technical services group. He is the technical services manager. Tyler, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. So it's great to be here. It's awesome. We just did an unboxing for the Delta T system, Delta T alert system. So why don't you walk us through exactly, now that we know we've got devices, they talk through the gateway, and the gateway sends those signals someplace, what's next?
You have this software running on your designated PC. So having done that, the software is completely free, as was mentioned before, and you run it on your application. From there, you would then go to adding a gateway.
Excellent. So I plug my gateway into my Ethernet cable. I come to the software. I ask it to do a search, or I have a MAC address on the gateway. How do I find a gateway?
So we've got a couple of options there. First and foremost, when we're working with adding a gateway, we're just going to go and click. Right now, we're in an admin mode. When we're in admin mode, the software is officially offline so that no sort of data changes will affect your sensors. Now, in that state, we can then add and remove any type of device and make modifications. Okay. So we're going to see if we wanted to add a gateway. We have two options here, find local and find remote. So right now we're working with a local gateway. It's on our local area network. So I'm going to go ahead and find. I have two options here. If you happen to know the IP address of that device, you could say, no, I do know the device ID, and you could go ahead and type that in manually. Or
and that would be located right on the back of the device.
You would have to do a scan through your whatever IP addresses your network is allowing,
right.
And you would find the MAC address.
Based on the MAC address.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Now, for this purpose, we would just do a normal scan since it's on the network. It's easy to find. We're just going to go ahead and search it. So from there, after a gateway is associated, we would then go to adding sensors. When adding a sensor, we go to the Add Sensor option here. It would then have us select from a gateway already in our system. So we have one there. And then we would go and move forward through the process. Now,
so when you set up a gateway, you get to name it?
Yeah, yes. So when you want to set up an actual name, you actually do that through the Settings menu here. And you would go to Gateway Configure. There may be instances where you need many gateways in one room. And we came across problems in development to make sure that we've got everything covered and you're not going to get too sort of bogged down in many gateways, one room. So what we actually do is we use the sensors and we name those sensors and we sort them by their categories. So for example, I've got 4 sensors added here. If I double click on that, it opens up its information. So that's site, location, the equipment ID, those individual alarms. And by setting that, I then allow myself to organize my view by site, location, by simply organizing in this fashion. So I've made myself a little table here.
So you create your hierarchy
Exactly.
right by dragging and dropping your column headers.
So I'm just going to go ahead and just renaming one of these locations. And immediately, I have a training 2, in this case, that separates this sensor from all of my other sensors. Now, if in the event that I wanted to, let's say, I wanted to update information, I can, in the normal view, back to what I'm monitoring, and I want to separate it by location. If I want to pull just these 3 sensors, I can do get temperature from location, and from there, it'll go through just those devices and update those pollings. And so I can keep separating all I want. I can make different sites, different locations. I can even separate it down to IP addresses.
Right, so really intuitive, allows you to do a lot of drag and drop, separation of not only rooms, but quadrants of rooms, if that's how you need to break things up.
Exactly.
Excellent. Excellent. So okay, so now we've set up some sensors, we've named them, we've put them in locations, we've got them going. What can I find out? Like what am I doing all this for?
So obviously when equipment begins to degrade, one of the main points that we're trying to catch here is that as your equipment starts to gather dust or potentially faults begin to occur, the temperature inside that equipment will slowly begin to rise above ambient temperatures. So since we know both those values, internal temperature, external ambient, we can then gauge the condition of your gear. And by doing so, you can tailor your sensor's configuration to a value that fits your equipment. By default, we follow standard NEMA settings. Basically, their sort of condition that they expect to see from assets, the differences in temperature that they're looking for. So we've got an indicate, a monitor, and a major critical, alarm level. These are ways that we can gauge the health of that equipment. And we then trigger alarms based on that. So these are sort of the defaults, but as you go through and you look at your equipment, you can tailor it to give yourself a proper idea about what that's doing.
Right, excellent. So you can modify these based on your application and whatever that may be, right? So certain cabinets require much more airflow, much more temperature reduction. And so you can even lower these if necessary so you get alarmed earlier.
Absolutely.
And so are these just static? I mean, you have to log in and see what's going on? Do they, record over time and trend? What type of functionality do we have?
So as you can see here in the top corner, in the top right corner, I'm going to go ahead and this is a larger view of that same graph. And from here we have, this is a very short trending, we've only been running these for a little while now, but this is a trend graph of both ambient and enclosure temperatures that this sensor has gathered in just the last couple of hours. So during that time, we can see how those temperatures have shifted just inside of the AC in this room, and we can track and trend that over the course of years. The sensors by default will report back 8 times a day, and in the event that you need something more refined, something more accurate to like the minute by minute, you can also enable critical reporting. And that way you can record something every 4 minutes to give yourself a lot more data. So over time, you start to see this trend, and you start to notice outliers in that event, and then those alarms start to make more sense as you're going forward.
So you'll just monitor these over time. You can also look, I guess, ideally, because you have equipment type, you can actually start looking at, well, based on these all being main subs and these just being lighting panels, what's an outlier in this category, right? You're not really restricted to just saying, show me all my sensors.
Exactly. So we even have here in the corner, right sort of middle right, we have our location overview. This is all sensors that share the same location. So as you saw before, I separated one sensor out. If I were to go to that sensor, I'm going to click here, I would just see that one sensor as comparison to each other. If I'm in the larger group, I see all the sensors compared to each other and I can see their levels. If, for example, I saw that one of the sensors in that area had a very high delta, or maybe just a very high internal temperature, that's a reference point for me to say that this piece of equipment is acting unusual compared to all of its brothers in the same area.
All right, so walk me through a little bit of what reporting capability exists.
So for our software, we have a variety of different options because there's never an end to the amount of stuff that you want to get out of your software. You want to leverage what you've just collected. So first and foremost, we have system reports. This is just the general status of your equipment. So basically what you're seeing right now on your screen is what a system report would look like. What's the last reported condition? What's the value of the battery? How full is it? What was the last reported delta, ambient, enclosure, all those values. Everything you would see on your screen, you can put down into an Excel sheet or into a PDF. Beyond that, we then have the inspection report, which we talked about a little bit before, which is your sort of maintenance report. If you have no sensors currently in an alarm, then there's really nothing to maintain. As soon as you start getting sensors acting out of order, you'll start building up that report that you can then react to. We also allow a full scan and a weekly scan that will then generate a report that is either all of your known data or a 1 week from that today's date of data that you can then put out into an Excel format. From there, you can also make a custom report if you want something that's months or a specific year range that you want to generate from your software. And we also allow people to tailor those reports to send themselves intermittent. So for example, if you were to modify your report settings, You can send daily, weekly, quarterly reports. You can change that you want to receive reports every hour. That way you have an abundance of options to gather information.
And those reports would look very similar to the charts that we're looking at here, but may cover a subset or a different grouping of the equipment.
Okay.
Excellent. Awesome. What kind of training, if I go out and I buy this kit, how do I train on this? Is there, video capability someplace? Is there, do I call up your organization? How do I get trained in the software?
So not only do all of our sales staff, they're all trained in the actual use of this application. We have videos online that are there to support them. We try to make sure that all of our guide materials are very clear. Now, I've been working with this for a while, so obviously I have a different exposure to it, but this is a very easy application to pick up. Honestly, as you run it, a lot of its functionality will come right through. You click around for a couple of minutes and you'll know 80 to 90% of everything involved with that application. We try to make sure that this is something that anyone could grab.
Well, that's good because I'm not really good at this stuff. So this actually looks very intuitive to me. It doesn't look very complex. A couple other quick questions. So I get an alarm. How do I know I got an alarm? Can this trigger some event, either through software or through networking? Can it trigger some method of getting to somebody?
Absolutely. So first and foremost, we use main email is basically the pretty much the typical way in which you would be notified this happened. We have configured emails that can go out for any of the alarm values that we have, whether it's low, medium, high, low battery, no communication. All of those will be sent by email to you to notify you that something is going wrong.
And is that like a template email? It says, very specifically, this sensor, this temperature, this is what's going on?
Exactly that. Sensor, location, site, the event that occurred, the type of, and the value that it got from that thing besides non-communication, which is self-explanatory.
Okay. Any integration directly to a CMMS?
We have several integrations that we're working on, but they are all custom. So in the event that you require integration into a platform, we would work with you directly to set up that.
I would also say that there's a high probability that if your emails are always the same, that a solution can create a mailbox that creates a work order. And so, instead of directly integrating, there's a way to do that much more potentially simpler. If they don't need it to be directly integrated, direct integration certainly much more functionality and capable in the end user. But they might be able to set up just a mailbox, right? And it goes to that mailbox and a work order gets generated.
Yes, we actually have a client who did exactly that. They managed to figure out, they wanted this very simple integration. They didn't want to go into the technicalities, and so they developed a way to analyze the email that came in, break that down, and create an actual software that ran from that information.
Absolutely.
Very easy to manage.
Yeah. It's a really good solution. When you're thinking about a third-party entity trying to integrate with the CMMS, sometimes that can be extremely costly, depending on what it is. If you guys are beginning to work with those organizations to create a canned, and I'll use that in quotes, canned integration for, say, the most popular entities in that space, then that's great. For some other folks, though, they might not necessarily have the funding to build a full integration, and that's a great option that you guys send out a template email.
Absolutely. Beyond that, so since you were asking other ways that someone can hear alarms, the software itself will also bring, anytime an alarm event occurs, an alarm panel will appear, and until you actually clear out those alarms, you will have a record of anything that you might have missed, anything that's happened. You can always export that data as a reference. There's also an audible alarm.
Any way to say we did something? Any way to say, I wrote a work order and this was the work order number? So that when you close it out, there's a record that you didn't just acknowledge it and walk away?
So when you want to this is a reactionary software, so for example, it is meant to trigger the response. Yeah. So in this case, what you would do, if any of these sensors are in a alarmed state or a maintenance state, we can actually generate a report for maintenance. So it is a sort of a quick breakdown which allows you to see the condition of the sensor actively, sort of an area for them to fill out information, and then to sort of file that report. Now, in general, you would file that with your management system, and the sensors would pretty much, in real time, update themselves to a new and proper configuration.
Once they fixed it, then the temperature should come down, right? The delta T should lower, and you should be in good shape.
in effect, it'll sort of self-inform you that it has now been rectified.
So it's either in alarm or it's not. How you're managing that is external to the solution.
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah, no issue either way, just was curious. That's outstanding. So what don't I know?
So just to cover a couple of little things that could be in there. So when it comes down to our actual, let's see, if we are going to work with the software from the settings point of view, we have a whole bunch of different options that are available to people. As we mentioned before, schedules are supposed to be 8 times a day. That should cover the general degradation of the system. But in the event that someone needs something really rapid, I want to know the condition of this equipment over the next 12 hours, but I want to know all the time rapid pace inspection. We do support demo mode, which is a way to pull sensors every minute. And it builds up a rapid amount of information very quickly. And so that way you can see really fine adjustments to whether or not your system is responding to any changes you've made.
Yeah, so just an example of how that would be useful would be in a data center, right? A lot of times data centers do load balancing because they have cooling, very specific cooling requirements. And so they'll start shifting loads across servers and doing all kinds of things. You'd be able to see what that impact is doing to your electrical environment from a heat perspective. And know whether or not any of that load is really creating a potential problem.
Absolutely. And then another, one of the main benefits of Z-Wave is that they support mesh networking, which is not it's like a unique feature to itself, but it has a very strong infrastructure for that. So what we can do with our sensors is, if you want to, you can enable mesh networking on any sensors that you want, especially in areas where coverage is iffy. Sometimes in heavy industrial environments, the equipment that you're using around yourself can impair communication. And to prevent that from actually causing any kind of loss, all those sensors can be enabled in mesh networking mode. In the event that one of the sensors cannot reach a gateway, they will piggyback each other's signal until it is received by the gateway and you receive that in your system.
Oh, that's great.
There is a slight battery loss because obviously they
constantly looking.
We basically tell them to be awake more often to listen to that potential signal.
Right. Excellent. Okay, sorry to
no,
get
of
on
course.
a tangent. What else do we have here?
So now, in some industries, the idea of having something being ambient and enclosure won't be necessary. They just want to know a standard temperature. If you're doing freezers, the outdoor temperature doesn't really matter. If you're doing anything that's about one type of condition, you only want to know, is it, am I using or leveraging this outside sensor or the inside sensor? Well, we allow you to configure those settings directly to set them just to ambient, just to the enclosure. Do you want to react as if it's the opposite of, for example, our current setup is the temperature higher than a threshold? You can also set it to, is it lower than a threshold, if you want to make sure that nothing drops below a certain level. In that event, you can switch any of our sensors to be that, and it will not affect any of the other sensors. They're all reacting independently. Other than that, we do support a variety of different configuration options when it comes to the actual notifications. In some events, people don't want to, for example, hear the audible alarm, which I can play if you would like to hear that, but it's a pretty for audible noise.
It's local to the device.
Exactly.
And most people aren't standing around their electrical cabinet. I mean, unless you're the guy from Office Space, you're not down in the basement next to your electrical stuff. So, somehow somebody would have to be able to hear that, right?
Exactly. Now, in the event that you know that that's not going to occur, we have a lot of sites that they're very, very off-site. No one's going to be walking out there day to day. So it's literally only a power draw to have an audible alarm like that.
Right.
We allow you to configure and remove that option should you choose it. In the event where you do have someone on site, they're going to have workers around. Having that available to you is always beneficial, but it's always a choice. We try to make sure everything is a choice.
And in some of those other instances, you were talking about freezers and things of that nature, that would also apply, right? So that the audible noise is pretty good in those environments because folks are more likely to be around.
Exactly. We also allow, you can send any of your notifications. You can choose which ones actually go out as emails. So for example, some people aren't interested in anything less than a critical alarm. They're looking for really that moment of decision. And so they can tailor down what they want, and they can then modify who actually gets those alarms.
All right, awesome. So that's a great overview of the software. I learned an awful lot about not only the devices, but also how you're managing them. Last question, are these rated external, outdoors, indoors only? What's an option here?
So everything that you have right in front of you right now is meant for indoors current operation. Now we do offer environmentally enclosed housings that are meant to go around the sensors. We do provide sort of instructions on how to environmentally seal the gateway. Due to the fact that the gateway needs some level of infrastructure to support it, we generally give guidelines and show you the sort of NEMA-rated boxes that we recommend for that setup, because there's a bit more hardware to actually install at your location. Now, our environmentally sealed housings for the sensors, they just go right on top, and there's a slightly modified installation template that comes with them that allows you to infix it to your equipment.
Excellent, excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I think it's been an absolute blast. It's been very informative, and hopefully we can do this again with your next amazing creation.
Thank you so much. It was great to be here.
All right, let's take a look at some pros and cons associated with the Delta T system. First and foremost, it's real-time monitoring. It's live. So at any point in time, you want to know what's going on from a temperature perspective inside your cabinets, you just go take a look at the software and it's letting you know immediately. Number two, ease of installation. Drill a hole, put it in, put the probe through, put in your set screw, and it's pretty much done. It's battery operated, sends out a Z-Wave signal, and so it's pretty easy in terms of that. You do have to have Ethernet on the gateway side though, so depending on whether or not you have Ethernet inside your electrical rooms, you could end up with, a negative here for installation, depending on whether or not you have Ethernet drops already in those rooms. On the Pro side again, so easy to install. This can send out notifications from the software, and because it does so in a very standard email, you could essentially have your CMMS with a mail group set up, write a work order based on the data that comes out, because you get to control that template. And so the template will send out an email notification if that email notification happens to be the same email group that creates a work order for you, assuming you can do all those things in your CMMS. This can essentially write a work order for you. So that can be a very big positive in terms of that. A couple other minor pros, it also takes temperature, like the video shows, inside the ambient area and humidity inside the cabinet. So there's more than just Delta T. Delta T is both, but you're also getting that humidity piece as well. On the con side, this is kind of a nice to have. I don't know how often, depending on the criticality of the unit, these should be utilized. I don't know that this would be a broad spectrum, put these everywhere kind of scenario for me. In my history in the maintenance organization, you're looking at a handful of really serious electrical issues that have taken place that generated some heat, that generated enough heat for me from a big alarm standpoint. Now, all industries are different, and I was in pharma for most of my career, so this could be just my background, and you've got to take this with a grain of salt, but for me, this is a nice to have. It's very nice to be able to get that temperature reading. Is it really required? Depends on the criticality of your cabinetry and what it's servicing, and how often you may have temperature issues caused by issues inside your cabinets. So you're going to have to evaluate that yourself. The fact that you would have to replace a battery, I'm pretty sure they'll probably come up with a very simple 12-volt solution that you can just daisy chain. But at the current unit, it's battery operated, and you'll have to replace batteries. And that's not really a fun job to do from a maintenance perspective. But more and more, we're seeing these remote devices and these wireless devices, and they're requiring batteries, or you have automatic lubricators and they require batteries. So I think eventually, hopefully, we come up with some low voltage solutions for these types of things and have them embedded in the manufacturer of our equipment. But for now, these types of devices require battery replacement. So that's kind of a negative. So again, on the negative side, just it's a nice to have and a battery replacement. Overall, I think the unit is well made. It's very simple and clean. The software functions very nice. It's very easy. You just take a look at your Delta Ts and you set your alarm bands, and you can set up your configuration so that it suits you. Emails, And again, those emails can, if they're templated right, could create a work order inside your CMMS. So from a software perspective, very clean, very simple, much like the other software that Iris has developed. It's very simple to use, user-friendly, not complicated, and you can pretty much figure it out for yourself just by using it. So overall, I'm a fan. I think it's pretty good. It's just, for me, a nice to have.
Hey, if you would like your product reviewed by Reliability Expo, contact us at ask@reliabilityx.com. We'll set up a time where we can either come onto your site, or you can ship us your product or give us access to your software, and we can do a product review for your organization as well. Contact us at ask@reliabilityx.com.